The courtroom was thick with the scent of old wood and the low hum of anticipation. On a Tuesday morning, the docket was full of minor cases, including a few charges of disorderly conduct, traffic violations, and petty theft. The officers of the local precinct sat in the front row, their crisp uniforms echoing off the panel walls as they told stories about the weekend. Their laughter echoed off the walls. Sergeant Tom Riley and Officer Mark Benson were the loudest among them, and as the morning progressed, their jokes became more daring. The black man wearing a navy suit sat quietly at the defendant's table, his posture straight, and his expression was hard to read. To them, he was just another face in the endless parade of defendants, another perp who'd probably plead out and disappear. Benson snickered as Riley whispered, "Bet he's here for resisting." Riley nudged him. "Or perhaps he possesses a fake ID. You know how it is." They didn't care that people looked down at them when they laughed. The bailiff was working on paperwork, and the judge hadn't yet entered. The defendant, on the other hand, focused on a folder in front of him and ignored the officers. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and he wore a tailored suit with a perfectly knotted tie. He had a quiet, authoritative air about him, but the police only saw what they wanted to see. In a slightly louder tone, Riley asked Benson, "Hey, Benson, think he's going to ask for a public defender or just represent himself?" Benson laughed. "Maybe he will speak to us about injustice. It always happens." A few more police officers joined in as the laughter grew, their voices echoing throughout the courtroom. The defendant didn't flinch. With his hands folded neatly on the table and his gaze fixed, he simply waited. The bailiff finally called the room to order, and the judge entered, her gavel rapping sharply. "Next case, State of New York v. James Carter." The defendant stood, his steps deliberate and calm. Carter was the focus of the judge's attention as he looked at the file. "Mr. Carter, you face charges of disorderly conduct and obstruction of justice. How do you plead?" Carter spoke in a deep, measured voice. "Your Honor, I am innocent. Additionally, I wish to record a statement." The judge gave a nod. "Proceed." Carter turned, facing the officers in the front row. They really looked at him for the first time, at his stance of confidence and intelligence. Carter stated, "I'd like to clarify my identity for the court and for the officers present before proceeding." He reached into his folder and produced a badge, holding it up for all to see. "My name is James Carter. I am the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The room stopped talking. The officers stopped laughing right away, and their stunned disbelief took their place. Benson's mouth remained open and Riley's face turned pale. The judge leaned forward, her eyes wide. "Director Carter, is this just a prank?" Carter gave a head shake. "No, Your Honor. I was in town on official business when I was stopped, detained, and charged by these officers. I have video evidence of the encounter and documents from the Department of Justice." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. The judge motioned for the bailiff to collect Carter's credentials, examining them carefully. Her voice was tight as she said, "This appears to be legitimate. Director Carter, please continue." Carter gave a nod, focusing on the officers at all times. "I intend to contest these charges and file a formal complaint regarding the conduct of the officers involved. I believe this case raises serious questions about bias, professionalism, and the treatment of citizens regardless of their status." After regaining her composure, the judge nodded. "Very well. We'll proceed accordingly." The officers sat frozen, their earlier bravado gone. The man they had mocked turned out to be one of the country's most powerful law enforcement officers, as the rest of the courtroom marveled. For the first time, Riley and Benson realized that their badges did not make them untouchable, and that the consequences of their actions were only just beginning. The revelation of James Carter's true identity sent shockwaves through the courthouse and beyond. A brief recess to review the documentation and speak with the court clerk was ordered by the judge, who was now acutely aware of the gravity of the situation. The officers who had been laughing now sat rigidly, their faces devoid of color, and reporters in the gallery were frantically texting their editors as the courtroom buzzed with whispers. As the reality of the situation set in, Riley and Benson exchanged nervous glances. Not only had they mocked a defendant, but they had also mocked the FBI director, who possess the authority to investigate every facet of their careers. Carter, on the other hand, kept his composure by writing quietly in his folder. When the judge returned, she addressed the court with a new formality. I am able to confirm, after reviewing the credentials and speaking with the Department of Justice, that in fact, Carter is in charge of the FBI. This court will treat these proceedings with the utmost seriousness. She turned to Carter. Director Carter, would you like to make a formal statement about the circumstances surrounding your arrest? Carter stood with a calm but firm voice. I am grateful, Your Honor. I was in town that night for a private meeting with leaders in local law enforcement. I was driving a rental car, dressed in civilian attire and not on duty. Officers Riley and Benson pulled me over for what they said was a broken taillight. Despite providing my identification and calmly explaining my presence, I was subjected to a prolonged roadside interrogation, handcuffed, and charged with obstruction when I questioned the necessity of their actions. I have footage from both my dash cam and my body cam that demonstrates my compliance and respect throughout. The judge gave a nod and asked that the video be used as evidence. The prosecution, now realizing the magnitude of the case, asked for a continuance to review the new material. The officer's defense attorney, who had anticipated a routine case, was now clearly shaken. Outside the courthouse, the story exploded across the media. The mayor's office issued a statement promising a thorough investigation, and news vans clogged the street. The incident was used by civil rights groups as evidence of systemic bias, and law enforcement unions rushed to control the narrative. The FBI's own Office of Professional Responsibility launched an inquiry, and the Department of Justice sent observers to monitor the proceedings. Riley and Benson were left alone within the precinct. Because they didn't want to be associated with a scandal, co-workers who had previously laughed with them now kept their distance. The police chief called them into his office, his face grim. You too have put this department in the national spotlight for all the wrong reasons. I hope you realize how serious your actions are. The chief cut Riley off when he tried to protest, claiming that they had just been performing their duties. You were doing more than just your jobs. You disregarded protocol, ignored it, and allowed your biases to cloud your judgment. The entire nation is now watching. Meanwhile, those who wanted change used Carter's presence in the city as a rallying point. He held private meetings with leaders of the community, listened to their concerns, and promised to use his position to advocate for change. He also spoke with the mayor and the police chief, urging them to take the incident as an opportunity to address deeper issues within the department. This isn't just about me, Carter said in a televised interview. It's about every person who's been treated unfairly because of how they look or where they come from. We have to do better. The city council called an emergency session to discuss police accountability, and the governor weighed in, calling for statewide reforms. The officers' union, feeling the pressure, issued a rare statement acknowledging the need for change. As the next court date approached, the atmosphere in the city was electric. Protesters marched outside the courthouse, holding signs that read "Justice for all" and "No one is above the law." Carter, a true professional, worked diligently to prepare his testimony, determined to use his experience to illuminate the larger issues at hand. Riley and Benson, once so sure of their authority, now faced the possibility of disciplinary action, civil lawsuits, and even criminal charges. The courtroom's once hilarious laughter was replaced by the sobering realization that the badge was not a shield from accountability, and that their actions would have far-reaching consequences. The day of the evidentiary hearing arrived with a sense of gravity that was impossible to ignore. The courthouse was surrounded by a sea of cameras and protesters. The city's nerves stretched taut by weeks of debate and outrage. Reporters, activists, off-duty police officers, and regular citizens eager to witness what many saw as a turning point for the city filled the courtroom inside. Even those who had previously dismissed James Carter respected him when he entered with quiet dignity. The judge called the hearing to order, and the prosecution began by submitting the dashcam and bodycam footage into evidence. The screens flickered to life, and the entire room watched as the events of that night played out in stark, undeniable detail. The footage showed Carter's calm compliance, his clear identification, and the officer's escalating tone, sarcastic, dismissive, and ultimately aggressive. The moment when Carter was handcuffed for obstruction was particularly damning, as the video made clear he had done nothing to warrant such treatment. As the video played, the judge's expression darkened and murmured in the audience. The defense attempted to argue that the officers had acted out of an abundance of caution, but the evidence was overwhelming. Carter was summoned to the witness stand by the prosecution, and he described the events with the same measured composure he had maintained throughout. He discussed not only his personal experience, but also the broader repercussions, stating, "If this can happen to me as a director of the FBI, it can happen to anyone. Equal application of the law is required, and those in charge of its enforcement must be held to the highest standards." The judge nodded in agreement, as his words resonated deeply. Riley and Benson were called to testify by the defense, but their explanations were empty. They struggled to justify their actions under cross-examination, their earlier bravado being replaced by stammering and regret. Other citizens' complaints, internal memos warning about the officers' actions, and expert testimony on best practices for law enforcement were all presented as additional evidence by the prosecution. The case had evolved into a referendum on the department's culture rather than just a single incident. The judge addressed the court as the hearing came to a close. This case is a sobering reminder that no one is above the law. Not the accused, not the officers, not even those who lead our most powerful institutions. The badge represents trust, and when that trust is breached, the court is obligated to hold those responsible accountable. She referred the matter to the state attorney general for additional investigation and issued orders suspending Riley and Benson without pay until the trial's outcome. The courtroom erupted in a mix of applause and stunned silence. Outside, the news spread quickly, and the city's mood shifted from anger to cautious optimism. Even though he was found not guilty, Carter didn't give up on the work that lay ahead. He met with the police chief and the mayor, urging them to implement reforms, mandatory bias training, independent oversight, and a renewed commitment to community policing. Additionally, he gave a speech at a town hall meeting, to which he received a standing ovation. He stated to the crowd, "This is not about vengeance. It's about justice, and about making sure that what happened to me never happens to anyone else." The city began to change. The police department launched new training programs. The city council passed a series of accountability measures, and community leaders worked to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the people they served. Carter's leadership inspired others to speak out, and his experience served as a catalyst for reform. For Riley and Benson, the reckoning was personal and public. They faced not only the possibility of losing their jobs, but also the scorn of the community that had once trusted them. Their laughter in the courtroom had become a symbol of everything that was wrong, and now they were forced to confront the consequences of their actions. As the trial date approached, the city braced for another chapter in a story that had already changed so much. As he prepared for his final testimony, Carter was determined to ensure that everyone who believed in the promise of equal treatment under the law would receive justice, not just for himself. The trial of Sergeant Riley and Officer Benson became a national spectacle, being discussed in op-eds and community forums all over the country, broadcast on news channels, and debated. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and the weight of history, and once more the courtroom was full to capacity. The FBI director, James Carter, gave his final, measured, and determined testimony on the witness stand. He spoke not only the night he was arrested, but the countless stories he'd heard since. Letters from citizens who had suffered similar indignities, calls from parents worried for their children, and messages from officers who wanted to do better but felt trapped by a toxic culture. "This is not about me," Carter said, his voice carrying through the silent room. "It's about the integrity of our justice system. It all comes down to how well law enforcement and the people we serve trust each other. If we want to be worthy of the badge, we must hold ourselves to the highest standard, especially when it's difficult." The video evidence, the officer's own words, and a pattern of complaints that could no longer be ignored were all woven into the prosecution's damning case. The defense tried to argue that Riley and Benson were victims of a political climate that demanded heads to roll, and that they were used as scapegoats. But the jury, diverse and attentive, saw through the excuses. They returned with a verdict after days of deliberation. They were found guilty on all counts. The judge, her voice steady but somber, addressed the court. The law is not a weapon to be wielded against the vulnerable, nor a shield to protect the powerful. When that trust is broken, justice must be served because it is a covenant. She sentenced Riley and Benson to terms that included not only suspension and loss of pension, but also mandatory participation in restorative justice programs and public apologies to those they had wronged. The city exhaled, a collective sense of relief and hope washing over the community. Carter was greeted by a crowd of supporters outside the courthouse, activists, community leaders, and everyday people who saw in him a symbol of what was possible when courage met opportunity. He exchanged handshakes, listened to stories, and promised to continue advocating for change. The police department, under new leadership, accelerated its transformation. Officers underwent rigorous training in de-escalation, cultural competency, and implicit bias. A civilian oversight board was established, and body cameras became standard issue. As officers worked one interaction at a time to reestablish trust, the department's motto, "To protect and serve," gained new significance. In police academies and law schools, Carter's story became a case study, serving as a reminder that justice must be blind to status but never to the truth. He continued his work as FBI director, using his platform to advocate for national standards in policing and accountability. He met with lawmakers, testified before Congress, and launched initiatives to recruit and promote officers from diverse backgrounds. He also made time for community, visiting schools, mentoring young people, and reminding them that their voices mattered. For Riley and Benson, the consequences were life-changing. They struggled to find new work, their reputations forever marked by their actions. In time, both men participated in restorative justice circles, facing those they had harmed and hearing firsthand the pain they had caused. It wasn't easy, but it had to be done. They began to understand that the badge was not a license to dominate, but a responsibility to serve. The city, too, was changed. Surveys indicated a steady increase in public trust and a decrease in complaints of misconduct. Community events flourished, and the once tense relationship between police and residents softened into one of cautious optimism. The laughter that had once echoed in the courtroom was replaced by a new sound, the voices of people working together to build a more just and equitable future. On the anniversary of the verdict, the city held a forum on justice and reconciliation. Carter was a keynote speaker, and as he looked out over the diverse crowd, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. "Justice is not a destination," he said, echoing the words of so many who had come before him. "It is a journey, a promise we make to each other every day to do better, to be better, and to never stop striving for what is right." The applause was thunderous, and as Carter left the stage, he knew that the work was far from over. But he also knew that, together, they had set a new standard, one that would echo through the halls of justice for generations to come.